welcome everybody to our webinar on Gaza and building a can a just peace arise from the war on Gaza. And we're very happy that you're all here. I think more people will be joining us as time moves on. Today happens to be the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, something that was established by the United Nations in 1977, but it honors going back to 1947 and the passage of UN Resolution 181, which ended the British mandate and supposedly partitioned the plot of land, the piece of land, between the Palestinians, the Israelis, and then Jerusalem was kept separate as an international city and under a different structure. And it's interesting to me today, from this vantage point in 2023, that there are fewer areas or a smaller block of land for the Palestinians, a larger block of land for the Israelis than what was partitioned and what was put into the UN resolution. And also Jerusalem is now the capital of Israel. It was made that way under Donald Trump, though he certainly wasn't the only president who had a mandate to do that. He was just the first president to actually make it happen. So we've been planning this webinar since before October 7th. And so, but we are at a very interesting or a very important juncture in what's going on with the bombardment of Gaza by the Israelis. I don't know if anyone got an update. I was asking earlier, but the first extension is set to run out this evening. And so there were negotiations going on today to try to extend whatever you want to call it. It's a pause, which is not really here and not really there. It's not a ceasefire. It's not a resolution to the conflict. Mr. Netanyahu says that he wants time to finish the job. So after all the prisoner and hostage exchanges, or all the hostage exchanges, depending on how you want to frame it, he says he's going to go back. He's going to continue the bombardment and the violence. So we are really poised to go one way or the other. And of course, all of us here in this room, I believe, want a ceasefire. And then what we'll be talking about tonight, what kind of solutions can be achieved and what kind of just solutions can be achieved. Because there is no solution without justice. There is no resolution that will last. Be in place without justice for the Palestinians and security for the Israelis. I was going to read something from Miko Khaled, one of our speakers, who's going to be here on video, but I'm going to wait to do that. Well, no, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to cut it down. Basically, Khaled said, good 10 to 15 years ago, This was during another war, or just after another war, on Gaza. Immediately after the war, while still in uniform, my father, we know that the father of Miko Peled was Mati Peled, and he was an important general in the Israeli army. My father said that Israel must recognize the rights of the Palestinian people. He said that if we don't do this, the Israeli army would become an occupation army and would resort to brutal means to enforce the Israeli occupation on the Palestinian people. He said this while still in uniform and never stopped saying it and advocating for Palestinian rights till he died. And then one more part of that, if we keep these lands, popular resistance to the occupation is sure to arise, and Israel's army would be used to quell that resistance with disastrous and demoralizing results. So with that said, our speakers tonight will be in this order: David Swanson, Executive Director of World Without War; Kamal Nawash, a Palestinian-born U.S. attorney, or U.S. lawyer. He's from Jerusalem, and then we'll have a video from Miko Peled, pre-recorded, because as you can imagine, Miko Peled is in great demand these days. And then we will have a presentation by Dee Piers, who's around the world with Dee and Friends, does a live stream and has been doing it for about a year. So I'm going to, and then after the presentations, which will be about 15 minutes a piece, we're going to have questions and answers, and I guess we'll take the questions in the chat, and Haig will pass them on to me, and we will have a question and answer discussion of these important questions. So David is the Executive Director of World Without War, and I'm very happy that he's here to speak with us. He's also in great demand. Thankfully, this is remote and he can join us live, but virtually.
That my cue?
That's your cue.
Thank you very much for including me and for being here and for everything you're doing throughout the year. We named our organization with the stupidest name ever because everyone, there's an echo or something. Maybe there's just somebody who's not muted. We came up with the stupidest name ever for an organization, which everyone calls World Without War. We put the beyond in all caps to try to help, 3% of people get it right, but it's World Beyond War.
Pardon me.
Obviously, if anyone hasn't read The General's Son by Miko Peled, they should. I'm going to try to share screen here, see if it works.
That's what I was reading from.
Let me know if you can't hear me or if you don't see my slides. So
I can see it.
Thank you. I'm going to try to give you 20 things that you're not supposed to know about the war that's happening in Gaza. Number one, it's a U.S. war on the U.S. government's preferred model. The ideal war for the U.S. government and the weapons dealers that have such control over it is a war fought with U.S. weapons by non-U.S. fighters. The war in Ukraine, the Saudi war on Yemen, the current war on Gaza, these risk few U.S. lives directly.
I just turned a friend of mine asked me to sign on to a Zoom thing. I often just turn them on so that people think that
have everybody mute, please.
Everyone mute, please.
Mute. Is there someone who can mute others? Does anybody have host key so they can do that?
The host could simply mute everyone and unmute me if they want.
Yes.
Well, I will try to continue. The only improvement would be a war like Syria, Iraq, Libya, the Iran-Iraq war, the Mexican drug war, World War II, etc., and so many others that have had
David, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Now we can. Try
Yes.
again. No, but now we can't. You're muted again.
David, please unmute.
And whoever keeps talking, please stop it. Okay. David, I'm sorry. Go ahead and now you should be able to unmute.
Jeez.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to try one more time. Number one, it's a U.S. war on the U.S. government's preferred model. The ideal war for the U.S. government and the weapons dealers that have such control over it is a war fought with U.S. weapons by non-U.S. fighters. The war in Ukraine, the Saudi war on Yemen, the current war on Gaza, these risk few U.S. lives directly, but enrich U.S. oligarchs substantially. The only improvement would be a war like Syria, Iraq, Libya, Iran-Iraq, Mexican drug war, World War II, and so many others that have had US-made weapons on both sides. The propaganda advantage in not using US troops is the avoidance of a lot of US coffins, but it's also a disadvantage because when people in the US turn against a war that uses few US troops, they feel no grotesque need to keep it going in order to vindicate anyone who's already died. See if I can get to the next slide. I can. Number two, it's a war against, not for, a rules-based order. Over a month ago, the US government's opposition blocked a UN resolution for a ceasefire in the massacre in Gaza. In the preceding years, the US had vetoed 46 resolutions on Israel, 34 of them related to its crimes in Palestine and the need for peace there. The US president may talk about a rules-based order, but runs the world's leading abuser of the veto, leading dealer of weapons, leading holdout on basic human rights and disarmament treaties, leading opponent of international courts. Israel kills with US weapons and US protection from the rule of law. Not long ago, the president of Ukraine said the UN should abolish the veto. While he had Russia in mind, I expect his arms dealer in Washington quickly explained to him why he needed to keep quiet and keep the cannon fodder flowing. The war on Gaza is, of course, marketed as a cops of the world police action against the crimes of Hamas, but bombing people is law violation, not law enforcement. By proclaiming this, it's 9/11. The Israeli government was declaring that it would not prosecute any crimes, but would feel free to commit them. It's a war, it's a genocide, and most wars are genocides. Thus far in Gaza and Israel, since the beginning of October, the proportion of the casualties that have been Israeli is not as small as the proportion of casualties in Iraq or Afghanistan that were US casualties. The speed of the killing, the rhetoric of the officials, the presence of social media users, the wideness of the grassroots opposition around the world, these are all different and extreme. But Ukraine is the war that is atypical, not Gaza. For over a century, most wars have not happened on battlefields or killed mostly soldiers or resembled what people think the typical war is. Genocide means killing or otherwise acting with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. Most wars are one-sided slaughters of mostly civilians, and any argument that a war is not a genocide has to focus on the rhetoric rather than the action. In this case, the rhetoric is just blatantly genocidal. There's rhetoric on the other side of this war that is also genocidal, and a great deal that is misinterpreted as being genocidal, but that is legally, morally, and otherwise no excuse. Bombing a nation because a fraction of those killed are members of the government isn't made legitimate because the government has committed crimes or because the US president declares eliminating a government through murder legitimate. It isn't. And the US government wouldn't think it was if someone were bombing the the United States to eliminate the US Congress. Number 4, this war is not separate from the creation of Israel in 1948, but a continuation of it. It goes on mattering decade after decade that most US students never encounter the word Nakba. It matters that Israel was created in 48 through war, terrorism, through massacring families, driving some 750,000 people out of their homes, demolishing over 400 villages. It's not difficult to know this. Many books, even comic books, have been published, films have been made, apps for your phone can locate the vanished villages, etc. But a massive industry promotes unknowing it, substitutes other stories and myths, warns you not to read those books and not to use those apps. 5, this war is not being done humanely, and there is no such thing. The notion that you can commit mass murder on an enormous scale, but make it all right by sending in enough food to feed a fraction of the people still at risk of murder is as useful as New York City's notion that in the event of a nuclear bomb falling on New York, you should go indoors. Pausing to allow ethnic cleansing and plot the next attacks doesn't make a war humane. Human rights groups that demand the Israeli military give proper warning before blowing up each home are advocating something other than human rights. The human rights groups that are proposing amendments to a bill in Congress for yet more weapons, amendments that would stipulate that the weapons be used legally and that particular illegal weapons not be used, are putting poison lipstick on a pig. If free weapons for a genocide cannot be simply opposed rather than beautified, is there anything that can be? Number 6, Israel is lying, and it does not matter. Telling tales about beheaded babies, exaggerating Israeli body counts, hiding Israeli friendly fire, as it's perversely called, pretending there's a military headquarters under a hospital, and so on. There is an endless logoria of lies. But if they were all true, they would not move the needle 1 inch toward legalizing or justifying genocide. You do not get to, and you should not want to, murder men, women, and children and infants because their government did or did not do something. You don't get to and should not want to tell people what government to have unless you are inviting them to join equally in a shared government. 7, it's not okay to murder non-civilians. We hear so much in what people call a propaganda war about who is and is not killing civilians that it seems almost rude to point this out. But it is not acceptable to murder non-civilians, not if they enthusiastically volunteered and not if they were recruited at gunpoint, not if they're lovely, endearing people, and not if they're hateful and guilty of atrocities, not if they were some significant percentage of those being killed, and not if, as in most modern wars, they are a small fraction of the casualties. War is a crime and a horror that always, always, always includes things people object to, like torture, rape, home destruction, and starvation. We should object as well to the murder. 8, war and bigotry are not opponents, but partners. Opposing war by the Israeli government gets you labeled with the now almost meaningless label anti-Semite. Meanwhile, people who hate Jews or want Jews to help bring about the destruction of the world and the transportation of Christians to Magic Land get to count as non-anti-Semites because they're in favor of war. But in reality, war is fueled by bigotry of the religious, racist, and nationalist varieties, and those bigotries are fueled by war. Look at the violence and hatred being directed in the United States against Muslims and Jews. Censoring and punishing and denouncing advocates for peace just pours fuel on the fire. You know, fuel, that stuff that always seems to be near wars and which Israel is already plotting to suck out of the ocean floor near Gaza. 9, the ceasefire proves diplomacy works, delegitimizing recommencement. If you can talk and halt the slaughter and exchange prisoners, then you have to stop pretending that the other side only understands violence. You can't resume the mad fit of mass murder and claim you had no other choice. Number 10, the two-state delusion is not helping. Not only is there no land left for a non-Israeli state in Palestine and much of the land covered in rubble, but there has always been an incoherence in the idea of two amicably coexisting states, one of which is an apartheid state dedicated to discriminating against all but one religious group. Unless two states are understood as a step toward a confederation and then one non-apartheid state with basic rights for all, continuing to say I'm for a two-state solution is not helping. 11, 0 states will soon be possible in an overheated desert. Palestine is warming twice as fast as the world as a whole, has seen a 3% decline in rainfall in the past 30 years, and can expect a 30% decline by 2100. Chunks of the coast, possibly much or all of Gaza, are going to go underwater. The river to the sea is going to be a dry riverbed to a growing, heating, and dying sea. 12, war is a distraction, division, diversion, delusion, and disaster. We've all forgotten about the war in Ukraine, even as those running it are admitting lies and conceding the need to end it. Even more so, we've forgotten about the non-optional crises. Here's COP28. How much did you hear about the plans for it? The cooperative pull out all stops effort needed to globally address human and environmental catastrophes is prevented by keeping the institution of war around and insisting that nations compete and fight rather than collaborate. You can call peacemaking a fantasy, but war making can't go on much longer, and humanity survive. 13, every day of war risks a wider war and a nuclear war. Wars are not controllable, in part because other parties jump in, parties in Iran or Iraq or Yemen or Lebanon, and then further afield. War makers are playing with apocalypse. 14, funding for wars is a sign of a degenerate society, but also of desperation. The proposal from Genocide Joe to fund 4 wars at once, Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, and the border of Mexico, not all of them exactly wars yet, is an indication of how normalized war has become in the US government, how hard it is to oppose. But it's also a sign of desperation, because divisions within the Congress are making it hard to fund wars one at a time. This means that we have chances of stopping the weapons flow that are closer to what we would have if we had actual public representatives in Congress. Number 15, we are many, they are few. Polling, limited as it is in many ways, shows that opposition to continuing the war in Ukraine with more weapons is growing, and that we already from day one have had a good majority for ending the war in Gaza, and a majority of Democrats, if not everyone, for ending the shipments of weapons to Israel. 16, activism gets the job done. The ceasefire in Gaza is due to activism, which is due to long-term organizing and educating. If the ceasefire is maintained or renewed, it will be due to activism. We need more nonviolent activism, less apathy, and less obsession with elections in a rotten election system. But we need those who oppose war on Gaza to find solidarity with those who oppose war in Ukraine, with those who oppose militarizing borders, with those who oppose building up a war with China in a very similar way to how the war with Russia was approached in decades past. We are stronger together, and our understanding of the problem is stronger when the problem is not a particular war, but the disease of war itself. 17, we need to prioritize demilitarization and denuclearization. If the goal is survival, we need to place a priority on ceasing to manufacture and ship, to give away and sell, to use and stockpile murder weapons, especially nuclear ones. This doesn't make the news for all the usual reasons. Even a rally for peace is called, and in some cases is, a rally for one side of a war, or at best, against a particular war. But we have to make opposition to each war, opposition to the entire industry of war. 18, governments do not try to end wars. Governments that wage wars usually do so because they think it benefits them politically. They do not think ending wars helps them, and they do not think anyone would dare replace them during a war. You do not change horses in the middle of an apocalypse, as Cindy Sheehan used to say. But people end wars, and people end governments, and Johnson and Nixon and Bush the older and countless others would rethink their political strategies if given the chance and the inclination. 19, the Monroe Doctrine should be recalled after tens of millions of fatalities. When the Monroe Doctrine turns 200 on Saturday, events in several countries will symbolically bury it. But we need it actually buried, along with the arrogance, hypocrisy, and hostility that has accompanied it for 2 centuries. And number 20, abolition is the way. As with trial by ordeal, dueling, slavery, and other supposedly permanent structures of stability and goodness, war needs to be abolished. The peace movement has allies and advisors in the movements to abolish police and prisons and other problematic institutions, and vice versa. It's time for a world beyond war.
David, for that excellent presentation, despite some of the challenges at the beginning. We apologize for those, but once you got rolling, it was great. And oh, you got balloons on your screen too. I'm not quite sure where those come from. I should also introduce myself. I jumped right into the intro without introducing myself. My name is Madelyn Hoffman. I'm one of the 2 co-chairs of the Green Party Peace Action Committee, or GPACs. Haig is the other co-chair. And so we're both happy that you're here. I have been to the West Bank, not to Gaza, but I've been to the West Bank. And I I was in Israel for a variety of different times. So I'm not a stranger to what's going on. But I would never put it together as powerfully and as convincingly as David just did. So again, thank you for your presentation. Our next speaker is going to be Kamal Nawash. And am I pronouncing that correctly?
Kamal. Yes,
Kamal.
yeah.
Kamal. Okay. You're a lawyer from Washington, D.C. right now, correct?
Washington, yes.
But you're from
Jerusalem.
Ein Karema, Jerusalem.
Yes.
And so take it away. Kamal. Okay, gotcha.
So as we heard from Mr. Swanson right now, over the coming weeks, you're going to have numerous discussions about whether this is a genocide or not, whether who's right and who's wrong. But regardless of how we come out of this conflict is going to continue after this particular battle. And so to me, like, my concern is, how do we resolve this? And obviously, I'll start with the conclusion, and I'll tell you how I reached that and why I think this is the most viable solution. So, I obviously support, kind of similar to Mr. Swanson, what I call the equal rights solution. Having one country could be in the form of either a federation or a unitary state. But now I want to go down to, why do I think this is the only thing that will work? And the best illustration is to look at how Israel divides the Palestinians currently. It divides them in 4 different categories. You have those that are what they call Arab Israelis, but they're really just Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. They make up about 20% of Israel. You have those Palestinians who are in Jerusalem. Now, unlike the Arab Israelis who are citizens of Israel with free movement of labor and people, the ones in Jerusalem, they are residents of the state of Israel. So they have less rights than the citizens, but they also have free movement of labor and people. And then you have the third category, those who live in the West Bank. Now, those who live in the West Bank, they are neither citizen nor residents of Israel, and they have no freedom of movement, no freedom of movement, or low freedom of movement, should we say. And then you have the fourth category, are the people in Gaza. They are not citizen nor residents of the state of Israel. They have no freedom of movement whatsoever, and here we are. And now look at the situation between all four. The best relations or the best coexistence between these four categories, between Palestinians or Israel, are between the people they call Arab Israelis or the citizens of Israel, and the best coexistence is between the Arab Israelis and Jews, those who are citizens of Israel. The worst relations, obviously, is between the Gazans and Israelis. So there's a relationship here between the rights that you give people, the equality that you give people, and the reaction of those people to the state. And it's no coincidence that you don't see people from Nazareth, from Haifa, from Jaffa throwing rocks or rockets at Israel. And it's no coincidence that the opposite, you see people with the least amount of rights throwing rockets and constantly fighting, which are the people in Gaza. So I think this illustration, to me, is the clearest example of why equality is a solution, or equal rights is a solution, or is the only solution that can work in this particular situation. And so I described, for example, as the Arab Israelis, although among Palestinians, we don't call them Arab Israelis. They're Palestinians from the inside, or Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. But even among those people, among those Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, there are even among them people who have even closer relations with Jews, like, for example, the Druze community, and that's D-R-U-Z, not Jews, D-R-U-Z. These people join the military, and then and there are different categories within Israelis. And so the question is, again, why do we have Palestinians who voluntarily join the Israeli army, such as people such as certain Arab Israelis, and then again you have Gazans who are constantly fighting the state? And again, I go back, it's not coincidence that the ones who join the Israeli army among Palestinians, those who join the police forces, those who join the Department of Interior, those who work in all different levels of Israeli government, happen to have the most rights. Now, I'm not saying those people are equal by no stretch of the imagination. Even the Arab Israelis themselves are saying, look, we're not equal citizens of the state. But that doesn't really matter at this point. It's the fact, even though they're not equal to Jews, and as Bet Salem said, there's nowhere in Israel or Palestine where Jews and Palestinians are equal, regardless of whether they're citizens of the state or not. But even in situation where there's no perfect equality, but because you have a higher level of equality, we have a lot more peace. And so this has to be a solution. And now the question with this seems to be an obvious answer. Well, obviously I'm not smarter than any of you. I'm not smarter than most people. My wife doesn't think I'm smart at all. But nevertheless, why hasn't other people thought of this? I mean, obviously the problem with a solution like this, let's get to the problem with it, is that for many Israelis, for many Jews, this is a very difficult solution to accept, because their idea of having an exclusive Jewish state or a super majority Jewish state, you know, for them, they believe, well, if we share power with the Palestinian, this will endanger the idea of a Jewish state, the idea that after certainly the Holocaust, that, hey, we don't want to ever depend on someone else. We want to rule ourselves. We want to completely depend on ourselves. So, and also there's then there's the natural human instinct of greed. You know, we rather have all the resources rather than share the resources. So the situation actually with the equal rights solution that I'm talking about is really not much different. If you want to look at examples, you could look at America's civil rights movement, you could look at South Africa, and it's the same thing. I mean, even in the United States in the earliest 20th century and the late 19th century, there were people that said, hey, why don't we give blacks their own state? You know, there was suggestion that we give them Mississippi. Others suggested, well, why don't we give them Vermont? Similarly, at one point in South Africa, they considered dividing it between a white and black state. But in the end, both realized that cannot happen. It just cannot. These nations are indivisible. You just cannot do it. And this is what Israel and Palestine have to come to. And the question is how? How can you do this where both sides feel secure and don't feel threatened? And I actually think it's not that difficult. Before I go more deeply into that, you know, I remind you, even in creation of the United States, one of the early discussions during the Federalist Papers, one of the earliest discussions that occurred in the United States, well, we can't have larger states overpowering small states. And the solution they came up with, of course, is you have 2 senators from each state, regardless of population, right? And that's how they came up with it. So regardless of how the population rises or declines, they still have the same equal representation in that chamber. And I think we can look at that for as an example of something that we can do. So, now going back to what I'm saying, look, we don't really need to look at other examples anywhere else in the world. I think the best form of government is the government that we create that fits our needs. And so here you have a situation where, again, you have Jews. I mean, from a Palestinian point of view, even the idea of a one-state solution or the idea of an equal rights solution, it probably might seem alien, although in recent years, acceptance of it has increased substantially. We have people like Rashida Tlaib, who is the Democratic member of Congress, who came out for it wholeheartedly, saying, look, this is it. I can't see anything else that works. I mean, you have 2 people here that are attached to every square inch of this land that I always call Israel-Palestine, every square inch. I mean, from Palestinians, if we want to be honest with ourselves, Palestine is not the West Bank and Gaza. It never was. Palestine is West Bank, Gaza, and all of Israel. For Jews, Israel is not the Israel of today of 1948. Israel includes the West Bank and Gaza. They call it Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. So you got 2 people. In fact, from a religious point of view, for Jews, the holiest places are actually not in Israel proper, are in Judea and Samaria, West Bank and Gaza. West Bank at least. You have Hebron, the Palestinians call Al-Khalil, even Bethlehem. You have, King David or Prophet David was born there. So there's various places that make these that give both people strong attachments, religious, historical. So when you want to start coming up with a solution, regardless of your beliefs, regardless of what you feel, I think the genesis of it, or the foundation that you have to start with, regardless of whether you believe it or not, you have to accept that both people are native to this land. Both people have, whether you believe it or not, I see some people shaking their head, but whether you believe it or not, if you really want a genuine solution, you have to accept that the other side is native and they have the right to be here. So now how can we do this while everyone feeling safe? So there are different solutions. I particularly do not support the idea of a confederation. I think it has to be either a federation or a one-state solution. It has to be a one country, similar, when 2 states but 1 country. Like we have, for example, New York and New Jersey. When we say 2 states, I'm not talking about 2 countries, like Virginia and Maryland, California and Washington State. That's what I'm talking about. You have states, each will have responsibility of administration of that particular state. They could even have their Jewish states. Palestinians can have their Palestinian state. In the Jewish, in the state we call Israel, they make their own laws, but of course, subject to some limitation, federal limitations like we have in this country. Every state we have in this country makes its own laws, what we call general police powers, subject to civil rights limitations. So, for example, the state of California cannot make a law tomorrow that says, blacks are 1/2 of a white man, or we can have slavery again. That would be in violation of basic federal constitution. But otherwise, every other law California can make, they can run themselves. And I think, that the solution has to be found somewhere there. So the question, again, the final question is, how do they feel secure that one doesn't overpower the other? Right now, both Palestinians and Jews are equal in number. It just happens they're about equal in number. There's about 6 million Palestinians and 6 million Jews. Globally, maybe coincidentally, there are 14 million Jews and there are 14 million Palestinians. Well, we can have these 2 states, Palestine and Israel, if it's one country, if it's still one country. Issues that are difficult today, like borders and Jerusalem, become less relevant because Jerusalem becomes the capital of like we have Washington, D.C., it's the capital of the whole country. Borders and the capital and Jerusalem becomes less relevant because you're not asking anyone to give up anything. If you're attached to Jerusalem, you'll continue being attached to Jerusalem. It continue being your capital. And if you want every Jew in the world to move to Israel and Palestine and become a citizen immediately, you can continue having that right. But the basis of this nation has to be equal rights. So that means if we're going to allow Jews from all over the world to come here, every Palestinian has to come here. And finally, how do we protect against one nation overpowering the other? Well, we can have a federal parliament, similar like we do here in the Senate, where each state contributes 50% of the parliament, regardless of population. The benefit of that is that the extremists will immediately become irrelevant. No Palestinian is going to vote for someone from Kahana, and no Israeli is going to vote for someone from Hamas. I see I ran out of time. I could go in deeper, but I think you got the point. And that's where I'll stop.
Thank you so much.
For me, although I don't hear it.
Well, you can't hear it. And thank you so much. And, a lot of us in our own ways have been debating one state versus 2 state. And I think it's really helpful to hear someone like yourself who has thought it through all the way through and has specifics to add to the conversation. So really, really appreciate what you said. People can ask questions when we're finished. And so hold your questions. Next, we have the video from Miko Peled, and we talked earlier about Miko, and I can't see myself anymore. There we go. And his book, The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. His father was military. He was military. But Miko has now completely turned around on all of that. And I think you'll like his video. It's not 15 minutes, it's 10. So We'll catch up some on time. Haig, are you ready to show it?
Right, I'm going to share the screen to play the video.
All right. Yes, we tried to get him to come so he could field questions, but
sorry I can't attend in person, but I thought I would send this video with some comments about Gaza, about the Green Party, and about what we can all do together to secure the safety and the lives the rights of Palestinians.
All right.
I'm actually in a hotel room right now, as you might be able to see behind me, and near Chicago for the AMP conference, Muslims for Palestine.
we need more volume. Hi, can we?
And just a few days ago, I did an event with Jill Stein to her launch, just to put my support in, to give my support to her and her candidacy, which I find very encouraging. So, what can we say though? Since the events since October the 7th have been monumental, they've been tragic beyond words. And I think Palestinians have shown that they are capable of unbelievable sacrifices, but also unbelievable achievements. And to some people, this might sound maybe unpleasant, but the events of October the 7th demonstrated how a small group of Palestinians coming out of one of the poorest and most oppressed regions in the world, the Gaza Strip, can paralyze the entire state of Israel. And they've demonstrated without any doubt that the Israeli army is really nearly a paper tiger. Now, Israel was paralyzed, like I said. It's still paralyzed in many ways, but the first 10 days, 2 weeks, people were clueless. The government was not giving any instructions. The army was nowhere to be found, and people were scrambling in every way. The savage response by Israel in Gaza is merely an act of revenge by a gangster who has been humiliated, and takes his anger out on the weakest people they can find, people who can't fight back. And that's what's been happening in Gaza. That's why the body count is so high. And that's why we see the rubble and the suffering. And at the same time, the fighting with the Palestinian fighters is not easing up. And the Israelis are losing many, many soldiers in these battles, in these fights. So clearly the killing of civilians has no impact on the actual military situation. But this is Israel, it's like a mafia, like a gang. And since they do not have the ability and they don't have the quality to fight Palestinians, it's sad when people die, it's sad when people are imprisoned, but to condemn or to criticize people who are oppressed when they commit acts of resistance, even acts of resistance that include the use of arms, is hypocrisy. It's hypocrisy. If we want the violence to end, the address of Israel, if we want the oppression, if we want the sadness, the grief, the killing to end, the address is Israel. And today, particularly on CNN, which I only watch when I'm in hotel rooms, by the way, the coverage of the release of the Israeli hostages is ongoing. It's 24 hours. They hardly talk about anything else. But they also don't talk about the release of the Palestinians and how their families are feeling. So they're covering the Israelis and how they're sad, and they're showing empathy, and how some family members were released and others were killed and others perhaps are still in Gaza and so on. Nothing about the fact that Israel is holding thousands of Palestinian prisoners. So because these are framed as prisoners and terrorists, and these are framed as merely innocent hostages, all the empathy, all the coverage goes to the poor hostages. But what are the Palestinian prisoners? What are they exactly? Ahed Tamimi was kidnapped out of her bed 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. She wasn't doing anything. Her father was arrested, kidnapped, trying to cross the border from Palestine into Jordan. He wasn't doing anything. Ahmed Ben Nasrallah was arrested when he was 13. He's 21, 22 now. He's been in solitary confinement for years. and his mental health has been compromised severely. I don't see that on CNN. And so the hypocrisy in this country is horrible. And I've been combating this in interviews and in conversations and debates, nonstop since October 7th. So, the Green Party attracted me initially because it's a very progressive platform on many issues, but particularly on Palestine, of course. And I think the way it's framed as, single democracy with equal rights, a free Palestine, free democratic Palestine, on all of historic Palestine, is really the only option that provides a possibility of peace. Because supporting Israel is supporting what we're seeing now. And this is not the first time that we're seeing this brutality, this savagery that Israel is subjecting Palestinians to. Excuse me. We've seen this, for decades and decades and decades. The creation of a single state was not something Palestinians did, it was something that Israel did. The brutal attacks by Israel against its neighbors in 1967 was precisely for that, to take the West Bank or the parts of Palestine that were not taking in 1948 in order to establish a single state over all of historic Palestine, albeit that state of Israel. Now, in many conversations, people are blaming Palestinians for not accepting a two-state solution. Israel made the two-state solution impossible, not by mistake. This was the design. As soon as 1967 war was over, as soon as this brutality was over and the lands were conquered, Israel began building settlements immediately. They didn't wait a year, 2 years, thought about it. It was part of the plan. And of course, they built for Jews only on Palestinian land, as they did everywhere in Palestine. Excuse me. And now people are saying, yes, but Hamas does not agree to a two-state solution. Israel made the two-state solution impossible anyway. Why does Hamas have to agree to something that has no possibility anyway? There is no partner for a two-state solution. Israel established a single state over all of Palestine. It's done. It's irreversible. The question is now, do we accept the apartheid state, the oppression, the killing of Palestinians, and this really supremacist state, or are we going to fight for a democracy with equal rights? So one side is fighting for supremacy. That's the pro-Israeli side. They've been doing it for 75 years, since Israel was established. The other side is fighting for justice, for freedom, for equality, which provide the possibility for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. So one side demand leads for destruction and genocide. The other side's demands will lead to peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Where should we fall? Which direction do our values point us? That's the question. What values do we espouse? And what do we think eventually to a real peace where Israelis and Palestinians can live together, where the killing is over, is behind us, where the suffering is behind us, which is really the whole point of this. I believe that that's October the 7th could have been. I mean, they were a watershed moment. The question is where it's going to go from there. I believe it still can go towards a real final resolution of the question of Palestine and a real dismantling of the apartheid state, equality, and inevitably a free Palestine with equal rights on all historic Palestine. The question is, are we going to push for that? Are we going to demand that? And we, meaning all people of conscience around the world, demanding ceasefire led us to this. I don't even know what to name it, but it's tragic to see what is happening now with the prisoner exchange and the 5-day truce and all that stuff. It only means more Palestinians are going to die. So what I've been saying to people is stay strong, let your values lead. If you have any questions about how to present this issue, how to answer the tough questions, you can follow me. I mean, I've been doing this, every day, all day, and there's lots of posts and shares, but you can also, feel free to contact me. We're working on an initiative in Washington, D.C. that will actually have a Palestinian presence there that will provide this information to people, to the public, to the press, to the decision makers, and so on. It's part of our Education for Peace and Understanding nonprofit. So, like I said again, stay strong. I think Jill Stein provides a real, a real possibility for sanity and a real possibility for presenting all the issues that we espouse be it women's reproductive rights and prisoners' issues and race and systemic racism and housing and on, all the issues that we believe in, the environment and so on. She presents it well, she's honest, and I think she'll make a great candidate. I mean, she is a great candidate. And that's really all I have to say. I have to run to an event right now. Again, I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but keep up the good fight. And I hope to see you all soon. Thank you. Hi, this is Miko Pellet. I'm sorry I can't attend in person, but I thought I would send this video.
Thanks, Haig. So we have one more speaker. Assuming everything has been worked out, even just to speak. That speaker is Dee Piers, or Dolores Piers, according to her name there. She's the person who has she takes charge of a live stream that's almost every night of the week, started in November of last year, and it's called Around the World with Dee and Friends. She's a former member of the Coast Guard, and we've learned a lot on her show because we've been following what's going on in Palestine very, very closely for, like we said, over a year. So Dee, are you free to speak?
Yes, I am free. Thank you.
Okay, good.
I just want to say that I'm happy to be here. And when we originally started the show, the concept of the show, we were going to go around the world talking about different places and what's happening. And at the time, Ukraine, Russia. And we did start talking about different places. But every single day, what I noticed, there was a place being bombed or an attack, a raid. Something was always going on in Palestine, whether it be the West Bank or Gaza. So that's where our show ended up being a show mostly about Palestine. And we started going into the history and the current events. And we've had people ask us, well, why don't you talk about other places? But the issue was that there are other places, but mostly everybody else is covering it. Everybody's covering what's going on elsewhere. And this has been going on for so long. And no one seems to care about, especially the West Bank. We see the West Bank being totally Judaized, the settlements. And during the course of the show, we kind of said, well, how is this going to stop? Who's going to stop this? All we kept hearing all year long was condemnation, and condemnation that after a while, it had no value, condemnation. And then in Gaza, the hard stories that came out of Gaza, there was a particular story that really upset us, was this photography studio, wedding photography, has it on the Gaza beach, and helicopters keep coming by and bombing this man's studio over and over and over again. But no one seems to care. And all these businesses over there getting bombed, it doesn't make the news, or it's just a matter of, oh, we condemn. There was a broadcast in the Times of Israel about the hot summer. Make sure you are in your air conditioning. You have plenty of water, plenty of water. So what do? In Gaza, you see the water supply being shut off, or being a small amount of water, and electricity shortages. So all year long, we're watching this. We're watching what's going on in the West Bank. Then Hamas had said several times with what was going on at Al-Aqsa Mosque that they would have to do something about it. They would have to act to stand up for their brothers over in the West Bank, over in, Al-Quds. And no one cared. No one cared. And you're looking at September. There you have Netanyahu at the UN going ahead, showing, Palestine's not even there anymore. This is the new Middle East. No big deal. Nothing's nobody's reacting or just condemning. So by the time October 7th came, Madeline, myself, Joe Firestone, all the people that have been with my show, when October 7th came, we were not surprised. We weren't surprised at all. You know, military action occurred, but it was a response. It was a response to horrific crimes that were being committed all year long over in Gaza and the West Bank. And then when Hamas says about why, gives their reasoning, and some of the reasoning is about Alaska Mosque, the desecration of Alaska Mosque, what's happening in the West Bank. And they listed a whole bunch of stuff. So what does Israel do? They go ahead and increase the attacks in the West Bank. And they're still doing attacks and desecration of Alaska Mosque. So Palestinians don't get listened to at all, and they're continually abused. We don't see a stop in that. And like previous speakers have said, is the fact that there's no value to Palestinian life whatsoever. So when we see right now with the different hostages being released, you have some groups of people that, oh yes, we're supposed to feel empathy for, but another group we're not supposed to. The people that are beaten in the prisons and tormented, that kidnapped out of their beds, the raids that happen all year long, psychological abuse. For the most part, if you're not being taken out of your bed, you know somebody that is. So you don't know when you go to sleep at night if your home is going to be raided or not. Those people there's no empathy for those people, for all their suffering all year long. And for so many years, there's no empathy. So we talk about this on our show all the time. And I would like to welcome people onto my show if you'd like to come and speak about, you know, the issue of Palestine. I welcome that because it is such an important topic, because right now it's big in the news, but we know it's going to fade soon. And the Judaization plan, we see that Judaization plan in action. The West Bank, they want to take that over. They want to take Gaza over, then go over to Jordan and take, you know, you look at the Promised Land, the Greater Israel map. And when we talk about the river to the sea, look at Israel, what they're doing from the river to the sea. It seems like they're the ones that are taking all the land, but anytime a Palestinian says anything, or anybody who advocates for Palestinians say anything, it's like you're the one that is, oh, you're being anti-Semitic. And then that's another interesting point we bring out all the time. Semitism, Semitic is a language. Arabic is the largest Semitic language. So Palestinians, they speak a Semitic language. So we're standing up for people that are Semitic as well. So there's a big battle ahead. And how do you save Palestine? How do you save the people there? How do you give value to these people? That's always a big question. And now we've got the holidays coming up. You look at it, Bethlehem, that's a place where that, you know, people don't look at, especially Christians, well, especially Christian Zionists. But anyway, that area of Bethlehem, they want to Judaize that. Just wipe out history everywhere. But our media doesn't tell us any of this. So it is, like I said, it's a big issue that the Palestinians are the one, which Madeline and I always say, the Palestinians' voice is important. What do the Palestinian people want? When we talk about a one state, a two state, what do the Palestinian people want? They're the ones that have suffered. It's their land. It was always their land, and you have an occupier come on. But what do they want? And that's mainly, I mean, at one point I thought, and what does it matter if I think of one state or a two state? The Palestinian people, what they want is what should be valued, and how that could, you know, can happen. And I recently heard, that China was going to be involved with this whole issue. And I think, yes, it has to be taken out of US hands. It has to be in a neutral hand. Because, human lives matter, Palestinian lives matter, their lives matter. And that just seems that always gets cast out of the system. I'm here shaking my hands because I'm just so infuriated with the situation. And like I said before, everybody here, you're welcome onto my show if you want to discuss this with me and Madeline and other people on my show. I welcome you all onto the show to discuss Palestine. And thank you for your time. Madeline?
Yeah. Dee, can you put the link to your show in the chat, please? In case people are interested in doing that.
Okay.
Listening in or joining in. Thank you so much. Yeah, we are at the point of the show or the program where we will be taking questions. I just want to add a couple things. One is that while people have been focused on Gaza, and Dee started talking about that, and the truce or pause or ceasefire, the illegal settlers and the IDF hasn't stopped what it's been doing in the West Bank. And that's what I think Dee was talking about as much as anything, that what's happening on the West Bank is not being covered, has not been covered enough. And, the focus on Hamas and October 7th was what kind of came out of Israel initially. And that also took away the focus from what's been going on in the West Bank. And it's whatever solution, all the speakers today spoke about that, spoke about the West Bank and the need for equality for the people on the West Bank, but people who live on the West Bank, they're still basically in lockdown. They don't know when a settler with a gun or when the IDF with a gun is going to come knocking on their doors. And so they basically, the parents and the families are basically stuck inside. They have been for 7 weeks now. So that, that's what, yes, there's been news about Gaza and Israel all the time, but not what's been going on a daily basis. The aggression against the settlements, and that's what I think that's what Dee was talking about. Also, someone just posted, I think it was David, that Henry Kissinger just died. I don't know, I don't know an appropriate response to this. I'm just going to convey the news that he died. He was 100 years old, I believe. And I'll leave it to other people to talk about if they want to. The other thing that I've noticed and that we all should take pride in and take hope from is the role that students have played across the country and around the world in talking about the occupation. There were 2 such events that took place in New Jersey. I know because that's where I'm from. A high school in West Orange and a high school in Teaneck. And in both cases, the students held the events amidst a lot of provocation, even in some cases death threats, because the community was opposed to them using slogans like "from the river to the sea," which some people have contradicted tonight or explained what that really means. So there's a lot of activity going on despite a lot of pushback. And that's where David talked about very clearly. If this is going to change from where we are now and the ceasefire becomes a real solution, long-term, permanent, just solution, the actions in the street need to continue. All right, so I see one hand up, so I'm going to go there because I don't have other questions that I've been asked to answer. So Norita, you have a question? Norita? Your hand is up, but you must be muted. Okay, now it's Mawar. Mawar, you're still muted. All right, any other questions? Because I don't see any. Okay, Barry, go ahead. Barry Bender.
Yep, I'm unmuting. Just a thought, and Madeline, you and I have discussed this before, and it's the first thing that came to mind when things happened in October. The first thing that popped into my mind was Pearl Harbor and how the United States, as far as I'm concerned, knew Pearl Harbor was going to happen as a provocation to go to war. My feeling is in Israel, the government that's there now, and I'll excuse my terms if you disagree, the lunatic that's running the country, right wing, basically, I believe, knew that this was coming. The military was there intentionally, not on purpose. He didn't care that Israeli citizens were, taken hostage and murdered because it's an excuse to go in and do the genocide. And I haven't had anybody convince me to the contrary of that to this point. People may disagree with me, but that's how I see what's going on here. And I think that the whole thing was kind of pre-set up in order to accomplish what, and I'll use the term again, this lunatic wanted to accomplish. So just wanted to put my 2 cents in there.
And do any of the panelists want to respond to that? David or Kamal? Or D? David, you've unmuted, so.
Well, I guess I think there's often too much interest in exactly who knew what or plotted what with Pearl Harbor and 9/11 and October 7th, when there's absolutely no question of the crimes committed with that excuse. I mean, Pearl Harbor is still the #1 excuse for wars by the United States, and its proxies to this day. They still let the ship sit in Pearl Harbor and leak oil into the water and go and marvel at the holy oil stains in the water with the beautiful colors, because they know that it justifies war after war after war after war. I mean, there isn't any doubt, there isn't any secret, there never was, that the United States and Japan were in an arms race and building up toward war, and the United States wanted Japan to attack first, and so forth. I mean, there's very little that isn't known, and there's not that much that ever wasn't. But the question is, what do you do with these things? Do you use them as a justification for endless slaughter and law breaking, and as a model for the world, so that other countries like Israel say, hey, it's our turn, this is our 9/11, meaning anything the United States did, we now get to do. This can't be undone without the United States answering to international law and making reparations and changing its ways and renouncing its approach to the world since 9/11, which it's never done. I talked with the Russian ambassador to the United States, who said, we're going to overthrow the Ukrainian government because Donald Rumsfeld said you can overthrow governments. And if he said you can do it, then we can do it. I said, can you not put nukes in Belarus? He said, the United States puts nukes in 5 or 6 countries in Europe. We can put them in Belarus. So, you know, these models that are established for the rest of the world with the idea that, well, we get to do it, but none of the rest of them will get to do it. The rest of them don't go along with that. You know, whatever horrors the United States commits, we get to commit too, you know, especially if we're the United States, you know, closest conspirator. So yeah, there's a problem of who knew what when, but, you know, there's no question of the horrors that are being committed. I mean, it's a public genocide. There's little kids singing in support of genocide. There's Congress members demanding genocide. We don't need anything worse. There isn't anything worse than that.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, and then for those of you who haven't heard that song about we're going to annihilate Gaza, it has an eerily similar feel to it as the scene in Cabaret when the Hitler youth are singing "Tomorrow Belongs to Me." The innocent, somewhat innocent faces, and it starts out with the bees and the blossoms and the flowers, and then gets into heavy, you know, pro-war, aggressive war kind of music and sounds. Anyway, okay, Dave Mullenix, you have your hand up. And hi, I saw a question, but I wasn't able to see it all. It was one about whether pressuring the US government would help. I didn't get to read the whole question, if you can find that. Or I'll just call on Brian Moore to ask it because it was from Brian. Okay, David, go ahead. And then Paul and then Brian. David, we're not hearing you. You're not muted, but don't hear you. All right, we're going to move on to Paul. And then Brian, and then Catherine.
Am I on?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Thank goodness.
I had to step away for a few minutes, so I didn't hear everything. But what I'm struck about is the mass this so-called massacre is couched in as you know, an invasion of Israel where there was no defense. And but I've learned through the Socialist Party, they presented an article that 300 of those 1,200 that were so-called massacred on October 7th were Israeli defense forces. And so that drops down, you know, the massacre doesn't look so bad. And plus, it's not reported how many Hamas soldiers were killed in that exchange of fire. So in this article, it talks about how Israel is not above killing their own citizens if they're trying to get a Hamas soldier. And so more of these people that were so-called massacred were killed by Israeli soldiers when they came in. And I think that's interesting that they would to couch this as a conflict between two warring parties. And as Israel claims in Gaza, there are casualties, civilian casualties. And so here that double standard that it's okay for Israel to initiate civilian casualties, but not for Hamas, who had attacked that kibbutz in that way.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Does any panelists want to respond to that? And then there's a question if there was verification of that information. I've seen verification, but don't know David or Kamal.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I'll just mention something for a minute and maybe we'll get back to it later on. I mean, the significance of what was just said now and what was said before, like it's our 9/11 or whatever. I think the real issue from here is like, where do we go from here? You know, obviously, all of us generally agree, right? We may disagree on nuances, but we generally disagree. But really, our opinions are a minority. And the question is, why are we a minority and how can we become a majority opinion? Why is it that still the majority of Americans see Israel as the victim and Palestinians as the victimizers? So I think really, you know, well, you could call it propaganda, but it's more than that. I think you know, the strength of Israel is and its supporters. It's not just in its military, not that it has F-35s and the most advanced weapon. I think their strength is in public relations. Their strength is in public relations. I mean, till this day, if you open, you know, when Israel said this is our 9/11, I mean they were basically appealing to people's emotions who still remember that time. And this is where we have to change the language. And I think this is one of the weaknesses of the two-state solution. So here we are in America. We have to, the Palestinians and its supporters like you have to speak in a language that the average American understands. Because you know, so rather than, you know, we have to turn this into a civil rights movement. So rather than asking for, you know, imagine this. This is how I think you and us, and specifically Palestinians, should be framing this. You know, in talking to Jews, they would say, you know, Mr. Shlomo, I understand why this land is important to you. I understand you have religious, historical, and emotional ties to this land, and I'm willing to accept that. I'm willing to accept every Jew in the world coming to this land and becoming a citizen immediately. And don't just come to Israel, come live with us in the West Bank and Gaza. We only want, and the settlements, don't remove any of them. In fact, build more, as long as you buy the land. We only want one thing, Mr. Shlomo, and that is equality. We only want equal rights. Now, what is he going to say to me? He's going to say, no, we can't give you equal rights. Well, why can't you give me equal rights? Well, if we give you equal rights, that will threaten the Jewish state. Oh, you know what, Mr. Shlomo, you know, when blacks were asking for equal rights here in the United States in the 1960s, during the civil rights movement, white people said, well, if we give blacks equal rights, this will endanger the white man or the white race. So I'm saying, I think after all this discussion, I mean, I've heard this discussion before. I heard myself before. But where do we go with it? How can we convince other than us here, this, you know, that this is a right cause? And I just think we have to change the language. It's not your fault. I think that's the weakness of the Palestinians. That's they fail in the public relations aspect of it, and that's what one of the, I think the strength of asking for equal rights than a state, because when you ask for a state,
okay,
go ahead. I'm sorry, am I being
wrong? No, it's only that there's many more questions, and so
okay, sorry, go ahead.
I want to keep the conversation flowing, because what you're saying, you know, we need to hear, but David Swanson responded too by saying, and I was going to say something similar, the majority of people in this country want a ceasefire, and they want an end to the weapons, the arms shipment to Israel. And people around the world are coming out in the thousands, in the hundreds of thousands. So we have to keep that movement growing, that's for sure. Okay, David Mullenix is back. And yeah,
hear me now?
Yeah, I'm coming back to you because you were on tap before, and you're back and we can hear you. Yes.
Excellent. This is for David Swanson or you know, anyone, but David Swanson. I think that one of the problems is, you know, everybody's got flags. There's a great poem by a rabbi about my only side is the side of peace. And that has been one of the problems, is people taking sides. And for peace negotiators, we really have to focus on giving everybody a chance to have their opportunity for peace. So I know David Swanson is very good at talking about this. And could you talk about that? It's like, that's really the only side any of us should be on right now, is calling for peace, and on all sides. True, there's a lot of issues on both sides, a lot of things that have, everyone's done something wrong here at some point. But once we start taking sides, then we stop hearing the other side's concerns, and really, yeah, go ahead. So go ahead, David.
Go ahead, Dave. And I have a stack of people after that. I have Brian, I have Catherine, I have Elaine, I have Don Fitz, and I've got Patricia. So let's see if we can get everyone in before 10 o'clock, because I think that's our witching hour. Go ahead.
Well,
Go
I
ahead.
like the topic, so I'll try to keep this to under 3 hours. No, under 30 seconds. There is no question that when you try to oppose a war, almost everybody will be incapable of comprehending that you're doing anything other than supporting whichever side they oppose. I have a friend, Yuri Shelyazhenko in Kiev, Ukraine, who is facing the prospect of prison and is currently under house arrest for allegedly supporting the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the evidence being a document in which he explicitly and repeatedly denounces the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but in which he also opposes Ukrainian war making, and that's not comprehensible to war supporters. It's just mysterious. I love Miko Peled and his book, and it's wonderful, and he's on the side of peace, not war. But his video was all about which side has everything right and which side has everything wrong. And I think you have to be very careful in making clear when you're talking about governments and when you're talking about masses of people, populations of people, because we should never be against any side, any population of people. These wars are run by governments. The side we should be against is the disease of war itself, and we should be on the side of peace and the abolition of war, which means supporting everybody, regardless of borders and regardless of the crimes of their governments.
Wow, you did that in under 3 minutes. Not 30 seconds, but maybe a minute. Well said, well done. Thank you. Any other, well, this question was directed toward you personally. All right, so I'm gonna go to Brian Moore, because I didn't get to read your entire question, but I know you had one. Brian? You have to there you go.
Okay. Yeah, I just I was concerned about our focus and our future activities in determining the outcome and for the Palestinians on an equal basis. And we heard a lot about Israel and what they've done wrong. But I really think that the power and the emphasis and the focus on the part of Americans might be with our own Congress and our own president. And the military arsenal and armaments and the monies that we send, all of these things can be withdrawn and removed. And so I just really think that that the focus, even though I'm angry about Israel and how they've treated this population base and what they've done, but I really think that we should take our anger out on the two parties and the U.S. Congress and the policies that we're implementing erroneously. That's all.
And thank you. And you reminded me again of some points I wanted to make, which when we say American, especially on this issue, we have to be very careful, because much of Latin America is opposed to the ongoing aggression against the Palestinians, because they've been a colonized people in Latin America and have their own genocides that they can point to and have their own situation. So it's the United States, it's not America, because there's a difference in how the people of the US treat this and the way people in Latin America treat that. And I know that. I know this because I'm living in Colombia now. I left the United States in April. So I know this from firsthand experience. All right. Catherine, you're next. But you're muted.
There it is. Can you hear me
Yeah.
now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. So at first it looked like everybody in the US was going to support the US, whatever we did. And then it turned around and now the majority of people are against the genocide. And I think Biden and the State Department were very surprised by that. And they're trying to find ways to backpedal. And so one of the ways that that we expressed ourselves as people in the US was calling and writing our representatives, and it's easily done with the White House now as well. Just Google White House and you can find it. Just click on it and you can write your message. You can also call at certain times. And I found that that by building relationships with the staffs of my representatives, I've been able to get, the message across. And my representative signed the House resolution for ceasefire, but none of the others in New Jersey have. So y'all call and write your representatives and push the heck out of them. Build relationships with the staffers, and they're young, they want to learn, they love it when you teach them something they don't know, and they love it when people are kind to them and appreciate them. So I'd say build those relationships and just keep on it and keep on writing, because you can write even on the weekends when the staff isn't there. And you can have a lot of influence, and we can all have a lot of influence.
Okay.
Go for it.
Yeah, sorry, we have a couple more questions. It's not grammar police. There's a big people in Latin America always get offended when they are spoken about, when America is used to define all of the all of North, Central, and South America.
Yes.
It's not being nitpicking, and especially on this issue, it isn't. Elaine, you're next. But you're muted.
Yeah, I'm
okay.
Thank you for taking my question. What spurred me on was when I heard someone talking about the whole thing about human rights, and all of a sudden I had the vision of Eleanor Roosevelt holding up the human rights and how much I believed in that. And I just do not understand what's happening. I'm pretty ignorant on this subject. I'm just getting myself really learning more and more about it. Being born Jewish myself, I'm 83 years old, and when I was 8 years old, that's when Israel became a state. I remember us running out in the synagogue, screaming, never again, people with the tattoos, and I was crying. My grandmother was telling me about the pogroms in Russia. And I am totally against this. In fact, I refuse to take a side, and I want to know what's going on with the UN. Why isn't the UN, why don't they have more power to have at least to sit down and negotiate? I mean, this is a horrendous thing that happened. I mean, it's been happening with Israel, with Palestine for a long time. Then all of a sudden Hamas comes in and does this horrific thing. And all of a sudden there's this big escalation. Why didn't they send in peacemakers instead of guns? I mean, I don't understand all this. I mean, all this to me, since the day I was born, there's been war. And now this war, it's very perplexing to me. So I would like to know a little bit more about the UN and why there's not more being pushed in that area.
Okay, one of our speakers want to answer. Before that, I do want to say David Swanson has been posting links to his website, World Beyond War, in order to get people to call for ceasefire and end to the genocide. And there was another, the end of the Monroe Doctrine on December 2nd. So please take a look at what's in the chat. Okay, David, do you want to answer this or Kamal? Anybody?
I can do it. I can do that. So
Okay.
in terms of the UN, as you there is actually a lot of activity. There's more activity on Palestine and Israel than any other country in the world. But however, the way the UN is divided, you have the general council. They could pass whatever they want to pass, but it's non-binding. It's just like a resolution to do this or that. It doesn't matter. And then you have the Security Council. They're constantly, every year, they'll have 2, 3, sometimes a dozen resolution pro-Palestine, and where everyone will vote for it except for the United States. And the way the United States works, there's about 4 or 6 nations, I think, 5 or 6 nations that have veto power. So even if there would be 9-1, where none are in favor of one thing, but if that one is one of those countries that have veto power, like the US, it doesn't matter what everyone says. So there is a lot of activity. And in the case of Israel, Palestine, in every instance, the United States vetoes anything regarding Israel that attempts to hold them accountable.
Thank you.
I could just add quickly,
Sure.
if you were to set up an institution to go after, the domestic gun problem, but put the NRA on the board and give it the veto power over anything, this would be the model of how they designed the UN. You gave the 5 worst warmongering, weapons-dealing nations the power to derail anything and set the agenda, which is, of course, why the United States joined the UN, unlike the League of Nations, where it would have been one nation among equal nations. And so you have to reform the damn thing, or you have to replace it with something more functional, more democratic, more suited to the purpose of ridding the world of the scourge of war. This has been true from day one.
Okay. Thank you, David. Going to go on to Don Fitz and then Patricia.
Okay, thank you very much, Madeline. It's really been a good discussion. I got a couple of points that I'd like to raise in terms of where do we go from here. One thing I should mention is that we've had a very strong Palestinian American community in St. Louis, where I live, and I've gone to fewer than half the demonstrations. I've only gone to 4. And so it's like every week there's usually 2 demonstrations. One of the things that I've talked to people about, especially Palestinians, is that Palestine is an example of what's happened throughout the history of capitalism. And capitalism has never been able to exist for a single decade without attacking hundreds of thousands or millions of people. It's a nature of capitalist expansion and production. And that Palestine is a symbol that can bring, the horror in Palestine is something that can bring all anti-capitalist forces together in the United States and throughout the world. And that's what we, one of the main things we need to explain to the understanding is that this is not a mistake. There's no error in what's happening. It's a characteristic of capitalism, and it will continue even if Palestine is totally destroyed, or even if it's victorious. Capitalism will find some place to murder millions of people. That always happens. The second thing that I want to bring up is, how do we deal with this? And I always explain to people that in St. Louis, that you can't really, there's no way to vote against the war on Palestine in Missouri, because the Democrats and Republicans have a monopoly on candidates. So I asked, today I've asked 10 people at a demonstration I went to, if they would, I asked about 15, I got about 10 or 11 yeses. I say, would you like to give me your name and email and phone number, so that when we start getting a big push on collecting signatures to get the Green Party on the ballot, that you can guarantee, that we can guarantee to voters that they will have a candidate for the U.S. Senate. And say, who's our idiot Chris, who's our idiot senator? Josh Hawley. You might remember him from July the 6th. Okay, so you can have somebody to vote against him who's not a Democrat clone of the Republican Party. And I find that the Palestinians that I talked to, and all the place that I went today was a St. Louis University, and those were university students. People enthusiastically say, I mean, some people say, well, I don't want to be involved in collecting signatures, but nobody has said, no, I want to vote for Genocide Joe. I think nobody should have the right to vote for anybody but Genocide Joe and the nutcase, Donald Trump. And I find a lot of people to be very enthusiastic about getting a party on the ballot because people know that you need to have an opportunity to vote against them, against what the Democrats and the Republicans are doing. And we really—
Okay, you said it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, okay. Thank you for moderating. Patricia, you're next.
Thank you. I'm directing this question, if you will, to Amal Navash. And I don't know how badly I've murdered your name, Amal. Okay, so I'm Jewish. You can't tell from my name, of course, but I'm Jewish. And it's not that I was born Jewish, I was, but I always have been, and I haven't left it. And it seems to me, one of the things that you brought up that I find fascinating, because it's parallel to something that I've been thinking about, is what you call the two states as in the states in the United States. So in a way, yes, that is a two-state solution. See, it really is a two-state solution with an overriding either federal or however you want to call it, United States of Palestine or whatever you want to call it. It's an over thing. And I have for a long time been saying, okay, let's have two states, and then Jerusalem should be run by someone who's neither Jewish, Muslim, or Christian. So maybe, I don't know, somebody who has absolutely no interest in the land, in that area, to run the city, because that's the only way it's going to be less emotional. But
what's your question, please?
Yes, thank you. Your idea then is actually a two-state solution with a single country, within a single country. So I think you got to find another way than calling it the single state solution, because when people hear single state—
Is that a question?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so
you haven't interrupted anybody else. Why are you interrupting me?
I did.
But they were on for like several minutes. I'm not going to argue. My question is, have you developed this further? Because I have not heard the idea other than my own idea, which is sort of similar to yours, but you have the overriding thing. And I'd like to see that developed, because I think a lot of Jewish people who are torn because they only know the two things, single state or two state, are torn. And with your idea, you've combined the two. And I'd like to know if you're working on that, and could you disseminate it to temples and synagogues and stuff? Because I'd certainly like to see more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that what I'm saying is considered two-state. I mean, the United States is one country, but it has multiple states. But the definition of, throughout the world, the definition of state means country. But in the United States, we define it differently. It's not a country. And so this confuses people a little bit. I'm sorry?
Clean Car Wash will be having a grand opening event today at 4 p.m. Check out the event.
I'm sorry.
Clean Car.
All right, I just muted that person.
Okay.
Go
ahead. So I am really talking about one country. I honestly do not believe a two-state solution has any possibility of working. And I use myself an example. I consider myself somewhat of a liberal in terms of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but really I would have a hard time accepting the two-state solution. I'm from Israel. I really am. I'm Palestinian from Israel. So if I was to accept the two-state solution where I'm giving the West Bank and Gaza, well, that I'm out of luck. That I'm kept out of the place that I have an attachment. My attachment is not to the West Bank. My attachment is to, the part of Palestine that's inside Israel. So the only way I can be happy. So by the way, just so you know, you said you're a Jew. Palestinians have never in more than 2,000 years, they have never exiled Jews. Remember, after Jesus Christ was crucified,
assuming there was a Jesus Christ, I don't think there was.
Yeah, let's assume the Romans exiled most Jews. It wasn't until the 6th or 7th century when Omar ibn Khattab, when the Arabs took over Jerusalem, they're the ones who insisted on Jews coming back. The same thing was repeated again after the Crusaders were defeated. It was again the Muslims or the Arabs who insisted on Jews coming back, because we actually recognize that you do have an attachment.
Right.
But we're willing, we have no problems. And just so you know, one other thing, Palestinians are made up of multiple nationalities. You may not know this.
Right. No, I do know that. I do know
maybe
that.
not everyone
Let him
does.
speak. Let him speak.
So we have, for example, a large Russian community, a large Armenian community, a large Greek community. We don't call them Greek, Russian, or Armenians because they quickly become Palestinian. We accept people, but what we don't accept is us being
really listening. I'll talk to you later.
I'm gonna make spaghetti.
Being deprived and being treated unequally.
Absolutely.
Now I realize it's a tough situation. So many of us have gotten killed. But I, as a Palestinian, if I had equal rights in Israel, Palestine, if I can live wherever I want to, if I can run for political office like anyone else, if I can work like anyone else, I don't even care what the state is called. If I have the same rights as Shlomo, what do I care what the state is called? And that's when I started this discussion early on in my introduction. I pointed out, why is it that we have Palestinians with Israeli citizenship who voluntarily join the police, who voluntarily join the army, and then you have others who are constantly fighting Israel? It's not coincidence that one has rights, one is somewhat significantly more rights, and the other has zero rights. So there's a relationship between the rights you give people and how those people respond to you. I mean, imagine, even till today, we still have problems between white-black relations in this country. But imagine if we did not give blacks equal rights. Imagine if we didn't pass the Civil Rights Act of 1967. Where would we be? We would have worse situation than what's going on in Israel, Palestine. So again, I would prefer my personal situation, I would prefer a unitary state. But the reason I say, hey, let's do a federation is to calm the fears of everyone. I know Israelis want their Jewish state. Palestinians don't really trust that they would be treated equally. So we'll say, hey, look, we'll have your two states, but we're one country. There's no actual borders. There are no.
We have 7 minutes left and one more question. But thank you, and it was a very comprehensive answer to Patricia's question. Paul. Oh, you're muted, Paul. You're muted still. There you go.
Unmuted?
Now you are, yes.
Yes, I would like to, the Bronx, I'm sorry I came late. You guys are great. I love the GPACs. The Bronx Greens put out a petition to restore historic Palestine, and I just put it in the chat. I'm hoping that I don't think we can endorse it tonight, but put it on the agenda, look it over, and see what we can do with it. Over and out.
All right, thank you. And what I would like to do in the 6 minutes we have left, brief statements from the three speakers who are still here. So I'm going to time you. I'm going to time you for 2 minutes, 2 minutes each. We can start with D. If D is still here. There you go. No, you're muted. Okay.
Okay. Yes, this was very informational, very interesting. I really think we should have more meetings like this. I really thought it was a great idea to have this. And what was I gonna say? Yeah, October 7th was so important. In a way, I know people say, oh, it was horror, it was horrific, but it opened a lot of people's eyes. The world attention came to Palestine. It came to something that Madelyn knows. For over a year we've been talking about. We were talking, talk. But October 7th happened and boom, everybody's talking about Palestine. And, you know, we've got to keep that going. And it's really sad that something like this has to happen for people to wake up. And when somebody's referring to it being like another 9/11, whatever, what would you call what happens on a routine basis over on the West Bank and in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's ignored in much of the coverage and much of the discussion.
Yes.
All right, so that was 2 minutes. 2 minutes for Kamal. 2 minutes is hard for Kamal, I know.
Okay. So look, obviously here we have a group of individuals or intellectuals that are very intelligent, and you're able to parse through the media and so on and come up with your own conclusion. But most Americans cannot do that. And we have to speak in a language that the average American understands, that is consistent with modern American culture. And we have to talk more, and that's why the language we speak is important. So rather than talk about, you know, again, 2 states, we talk about desegregation. Rather than talk about settlements, we talk about, they're not really settlements. These are racially segregated Jewish-only communities. So we have to talk about a language that the average American understands. And just remember how America is broken up. You have about 50 million Blacks. You have about 70 to 80 million Hispanics. You have about 20 million or so Asians. And then among whites, they're divided between Democrats and Republicans. So the majority of Americans, if we speak the right language, they can understand it. The only people we cannot win over that I concede are 23% of Americans who are the evangelical Christians. But we can potentially win over 70% if we speak in a language that they understand. And that is, hey, let's desegregate. Let's give these people equal rights.
Okay, that was great. Great ending. David, take us to 10.
I hate to say this to a political group that does election stuff, but forget the elections, especially at the national level in a rotten, broken system. Do the activism for peace, for justice, and for reforming the election system so that we can have an open, honest, fair election someday. Women didn't vote themselves the right to vote. The civil rights movement didn't vote itself the right to vote, or any of the, you know, what changes the world dramatically more than any elections, even in a system where you can actually vote for decent candidates, is activism, nonviolent activism. And we've got a surge of it. Get these people into the permanent peace movement so they stay with it, so they're against the next war and the next war and the next war, not just this war. This is what happened with Vietnam, with Iraq, with other wars. Get these people, and the young people, we are a majority. We don't know it. The television doesn't tell us, but on most issues, including peace, including ceasefire in Israel right now, we are a majority. They tell us we're not. And among young people, we're 80, 90%. There's like 3 young people who support Joe Biden and this war, you know, a couple of dogs and cats, that's it. So get the old people and the young people together and build a movement to oppose not just this war, but every war, and to understand our own power, which is part of the job of implementing it and moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you. And we really do have to keep our eye on what's going on with the Arab community, the Muslim community, and the young people, because there are so many who said they're not going to vote Democrat ever again, because of the betrayal on this issue, and others, of course, but this one leads the list. And Kamal just posted his website in the chat. It's freemuslims.org. You gotta unmute.
It's an article I just posted called
Okay.
Lessons Learned from Israel's War on Gaza. And it
Okay.
talks about some of the things, how in the end, you know, there's no other solution other than the equal rights solution. They go into more details than I did here why that is.
Okay, that's great. Okay, and on that note, because it's 10 o'clock on the nose, I think we should, sorry. I think we should adjourn this webinar. And I know, Hyde, what's going to happen with the recording so that people know?
The recording will be reviewed and edited to remove a few embarrassments, and that will become available. We'll post the link on GPUS website and on the GPAC's websites.
All right. Well, thanks to everybody for being here. Thanks for all the questions, for all the feedback, the backs and forths, the great ideas put forward. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you all.
Madeline.
And
Stay
thanks
safe,
to the
everybody.
speakers.